Okay, we're going to do June 19th. It's day 170 of the 1 year chronological study Bible. It's the New Living Translation put out by Tyndale. Spoiler alert, I am a person who looks ahead. And as I said when we started this, I've never done the Bible chronologically. And so I looked ahead over the next few days and we start adding in a bunch of the books of prophecy. There will be bits and pieces of Isaiah starting to show up. In a few days, we will do the entire book of Jonah. And just a couple days after that, we do Hosea. And so we are going to start breaking up Kings and Chronicles a little bit more than what we have been. We've been reading almost straight from Kings and Chronicles for quite a while now. And I agree, it gets a little old. And I knew that going into this. And so this is one of the reasons that I've never actually done the Bible chronologically, because there are places where we can get um, tripped up and maybe like, you know, tired of reading the same thing twice, right? Because we've been doing that. We read it from Kings and then we read it from Chronicles. And sometimes it's the exact same verbiage that we're the same story. Sometimes we get extra pieces from one that we didn't get from the other, right? So it's interesting, and it's going to pick back up here like now, like today. So let's get on with this. Jeremiah, in a context of devastation and despair, assesses his crumbling world and concludes, "The faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercies never cease." And we find this in Lamentations 3:22. What is true of his generation is true of every generation. God raises up Hazael of Aram to oppress the northern kingdom of Israel, whose king Jehoahaz follows in the wicked ways of Jeroboam. Jehoahaz pleads with the Lord, and the Lord rescues him, yet he continues doing evil in the Lord's sight. King Joash of Judah does no better. Hazael sets his face against Jerusalem, and Joash pays him off with the sacred and devoted things from the temple treasuries. Where is God in all of this? If not for God's covenant with Israel's ancestors, both Israel and Judah would have been destroyed by their enemies. 2 Kings 13:23. God's goodness is not based on the performance of his people, but on God's covenant faithfulness. God is better to humans than they deserve, and humans are more sinful than they imagine. And that's true from the beginning of time. It's not just New Covenant, it's not just today's basis of covenant with God. We see it throughout history. And so let's get started. 2 Kings chapter 13, verse 1. It's about 814 BC. Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, began to rule over Israel in the 23rd year of King Joash's reign in Judah. He reigned in Samaria 17 years, but he did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He followed the example of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, continuing the sins that Jeroboam had led Israel to commit. So the Lord was very angry with Israel, and he allowed King Hazael of Aram and his son Ben-Hadad to defeat them repeatedly. Then Jehoahaz prayed for the Lord's help, and the Lord heard his prayer, for he could see how severely the king of Aram was oppressing Israel. So the Lord provided someone to rescue the Israelites from the tyranny of the Arameans. Then Israel lived in safety again, as they had in former days. But they continued to sin, following the evil example of Jeroboam. They also allowed the Asherah pole in Samaria to remain standing. Finally, Jehoahaz's army was reduced to 50 charioteers, 10 chariots, and 10,000 foot soldiers. The king of Aram had killed the others, trampling them like dust under his feet. 2 Kings chapter 13, verse 8. The rest of the events in Jehoahaz's reign, everything he did, and the extent of his power are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Israel. When Jehoahaz died, he was buried in Samaria. Then his son Jehoash became the next king. 2 Kings 13, beginning in verse 10. It's about 798 BC. Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, began to rule over Israel in the 37th year of King Joash's reign in Judah. He reigned in Samaria 16 years, but he did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to turn from the sins that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had led Israel to commit. 2 Kings 12, beginning in verse 17. That's weird that we back up in Kings and yet we come forward in years, because we're forward 2 years. It's 796 BC now. About this time, King Hazael of Aram went to war against Gath and captured it. Then he turned to attack Jerusalem. King Joash collected all the sacred objects that Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, and Ahaziah, the previous kings of Judah, had dedicated, along with what he himself had dedicated. He sent them all to Hazael, along with all the gold in the treasuries of the Lord's temple and the royal palace. So Hazael called off his attack on Jerusalem. The rest of the events in Joash's reign and everything he did are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Judah. Joash's officers plotted against him and assassinated him at Beth Millo on the road to Silla. The assassins were Josachar, son of Shimeath, and Jehozabad, son of Shomer, both trusted advisors. Joash was buried with his ancestors in the city of David. Then his son Amaziah became the next king. 2 Chronicles 24, beginning in verse 23. In the spring of the year, you remember when King David in the spring of the year didn't go off to war like kings normally do. So in the spring of the year, the Aramean army marched against Joash. They invaded Judah and Jerusalem and killed all the leaders of the nation. Then they sent all the plunder back to their king in Damascus. Although the Arameans attacked with only a small army, the Lord helped them conquer the much larger army of Judah. The people of Judah had abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors, so judgment was carried out against Joash. I'm sorry, my cat keeps coming across. The Arameans withdrew, leaving Joash severely wounded, but his own officials plotted to kill him for murdering the son of Jehoiada the priest. They assassinated him as he lay in bed. Then he was buried in the city of David, but not in the royal cemetery. The assassins were Josachar, the son of an Ammonite woman named Shimeath, and Jehozabad, the son of a Moabite woman named Shomer. The account of the sons of Joash, the prophecies about him, and the record of his restoration of the temple of God are written in the commentary on the book of the Kings. His son Amaziah became the next king. Elisha's final prophecy. 2 Kings 13, 14 through 23. When Elisha was in his last illness, King Joash of Israel visited him and wept over him. My father, I see the chariots and charioteers of Israel, he cried. Elisha told him, get a bow and some arrows, and the king did as he was told. Elisha told him, put your hand on the bow, and Elisha laid his own hands on the king's hands. Then he commanded, open that eastern window, and he opened it. Then he said, shoot. So he shot an arrow. Elisha proclaimed, this is the Lord's arrow, an arrow of victory over Aram, for you will completely conquer the Arameans at Aphek. Then he said, now pick up the other arrows and strike them against the ground. So the king picked them up and struck the ground 3 times. But the man of God was angry with him. You should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times, he exclaimed. Then you would have beaten Aram until it was entirely destroyed. Now you will be victorious only 3 times. Then Elisha died and was buried. Groups of Moabite raiders used to invade the land each spring. Once, when some Israelites were burying a man, they spied a band of these raiders, so they hastily threw the corpse into the tomb of Elisha and fled. But as soon as the body touched Elisha's bones, the dead man revived and jumped to his feet. King Hazael of Aram had oppressed Israel during the entire reign of King Jehoahaz. But the Lord was gracious and merciful to the people of Israel, and they were not totally destroyed. He pitied them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And to this day, he still has not completely destroyed them or banished them from his presence. 2 Kings chapter 13, beginning in verse 24. King Hazael of Aram died, and his son Ben-Hadad became the next king. Then Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, recaptured from Ben-Hadad, son of Hazael, the towns that had been taken away from Jehoash's father, Jehoahaz. Jehoash defeated Ben-Hadad on 3 occasions, and he recovered the Israelite towns. And that concludes the June 19th Daily Bible Reading. Thanks for joining in.